The sun blazed mercilessly over the Iraqi desert, turning the sand into a shimmering sea of heat waves. Operation Desert Storm was in full swing. Through the wavering air, a squad of elite operators moved in formation across a rocky outcrop, their uniform dark with sweat, their movements precise despite the oppressive temperature. They were hunting high-value targets, men whose elimination would save countless American lives. Master Chief William Daniels leaned forward in his chair, his weathered hands folded on the polished table before him. The conference room at the Naval Amphibious Base Coronado was filled with fresh-faced recruits, their backs straight, their eyes fixed on the old warrior before them. At 73, Daniels carried the weight of decades of service in his stooped shoulders and lined face, but his eyes remained sharp, missing nothing. They never saw it coming, Daniels said, his voice a graveled rumble that commanded attention without effort. 8 of our best operators pinned down in a wadi enemy fire coming from 3 directions. Command was calling for emergency extraction, but the closest birds were 20 minutes out. They weren't going to make it. He paused, looking at each young face in turn. Some would wash out, some would serve with distinction, some might die. All deserved the truth. The enemy had the high ground superior numbers, and our boys had already taken casualties. The mission was blown. Then something happened that changed everything. Daniels leaned back, a hint of a smile touching the corner of his mouth. 3 shots, 3 kills. Over 1,600 meters away, the enemy snipers dropped one after another, their positions perfect, their security tight, but not tight enough. The room was silent, every recruit hanging on his words. None of us knew it then, but the person who saved that entire squad was a woman who wasn't even supposed to be there according to the official roster. The recruits exchanged glances. Daniels noted their reactions without comment. Some skeptical, some intrigued. Exactly as expected. That M40A1 sniper rifle she used was chambered for 7.62 NATO with a Macmillan fiberglass stock and a Unertl 10x scope. Not ideal for that distance. The shots were taken in 118-degree heat with 15 mph crosswinds. Each one required calculating for wind drift, bullet drop, and atmospheric refraction. Each shot was perfect. It took us 3 days to find her position, and when we did, all we found were 3 brass casings placed in a neat triangle. Daniel stood motioning for the recruits to follow him. "Walk with me. There's something I want to show you." The group moved through the sprawling training complex of the Naval Special Warfare Center. Coronado was hallowed ground for those in the special operations community, the birthplace of countless warriors, the testing ground where ordinary men discovered their true limits and occasionally pushed beyond them. Daniels led them to a large gymnasium, its walls lined with training mats and equipment. The air carried the familiar scent of sweat and disinfectant. The sounds of men training echoed from adjacent rooms, but this particular space was currently empty. "This facility has seen thousands of operators come through over the decades," Daniel said, "but one spot in particular has special significance." He walked to the center of a blue mat and pointed to a small black star about 2 inches across, nearly invisible against the dark blue unless you knew to look for it. "See that? We call it the star. It marks the exact spot where a lieutenant learned the most expensive lesson of his career." Daniels tapped his temple. "A lesson about judging books by their covers." The recruits gathered around, peering at the unassuming mark. "Sir, what happened here?" one of them asked. Daniels nodded as if he'd been waiting for the question. "It happened 5 years ago, right where you're standing. It was a moment that changed how we approach combat training throughout the entire special warfare community. Some call it the Reynolds incident. Others call it the day reality checked in. I was here. I saw it happen. And now I'm going to tell you exactly what went down." The morning had begun like any other at the Coronado training facility. The gymnasium buzzed with activity as sailors gathered for advanced hand-to-hand combat training. The air was thick with humidity despite the powerful air conditioning units working overtime. The blue mats were arranged in a large square in the center of the room, surrounded by weight equipment and training dummies. Lieutenant James Barrett stood at the front of the class, his posture perfect, his uniform crisp despite the heat. At 32, Barrett was everything the Navy wanted in an Officer West Point graduate, decorated combat veteran, and the son of a 3-star general. His record in Afghanistan included multiple commendations for bravery under fire. His physical fitness scores were consistently at the top of the charts. Barrett was the kind of officer who looked the part, Daniels told the recruits. Tall, built like a linebacker with that square jaw they seemed to hand out at officer candidate school. The men respected him. The brass loved him. He was on a fast track to command. What few people knew was that Barrett carried invisible wounds. During his last deployment to Kandahar, his unit had been ambushed. 3 men died, including his closest friend. Barrett had dragged 2 wounded teammates to safety under heavy fire, earning him a Silver Star. But the loss haunted him. The thing about trauma, Daniel said quietly, is that it changes you. Sometimes it makes you stronger. Sometimes it breaks you. Sometimes it hardens you in ways that seem like strength, but aren't. Barrett had developed rigid ideas about combat effectiveness. He believed that physical strength was the ultimate determinant of survival. He had come to view any deviation from traditional standards as a threat to operational integrity. In private conversations, he blamed his teammates' deaths on what he called lowered standards in social engineering in the military. He believed women had no place in combat roles, Daniels explained, thought they were a liability that would get real operators killed. He wasn't shy about sharing those opinions either. The class that day consisted of 30 sailors, including 4 women. Most were young in their 20s, eager to prove themselves. They stood at attention as Barrett paced before them, explaining the day's objectives. Today we're covering extraction techniques when you're outmatched by a larger opponent, Barrett announced. This isn't theoretical. This is life and death. When your primary weapon fails and you're down to hand, these techniques are all that stand between you and a pine box. That's when Petty Officer Alexandra Reynolds walked in. She was 5 minutes late, and Barrett noticed immediately. She moved quietly to the back of the formation, taking her place without disrupting the class. But Barrett wasn't about to let the infraction slide. "Petty Officer," he called out, his voice sharp, "nice of you to join us. Care to explain why you think your time is more valuable than everyone else's?" Alex stood at attention. "No excuse, sir. I was delayed during weapons inspection." At first glance, there was nothing remarkable about Alexandra Reynolds. Average height, athletic but not bulky. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation bun. Her uniform was worn, but immaculate. She wasn't particularly beautiful or striking. She was by all appearances utterly unremarkable, except for her eyes. "I've been in this business a long time," Daniels told the recruits. "I've seen all kinds of operators. Delta Force Rangers, SEALs. The real deal. The ones who've been best in the worst situations imaginable and come out of the other side. They all have a certain look in their eyes. It's not something you can fake or manufacture. It's the look of someone who has seen the devil up close and didn't blink." Reynolds had those eyes. Gray as a winter sea alert, but not anxious, taking in everything while revealing nothing. They were the eyes of someone who had made life or death decisions and lived with the consequences. Daniels, watching from the back of the room, noticed other details too. The way she distributed her weight evenly on the balls of her feet, ready to move in any direction. The subtle scans she performed, cataloging exits, threats, angles. The perfect stillness that spoke of absolute control. "Most people fidget," Daniels explained. "They shift their weight, adjust their clothing, look around. It's normal human behavior." Reynolds stood like a statue, but not a rigid one, like a coiled spring, perfectly balanced, perfectly still, but ready to unleash kinetic energy in an instant. Barrett didn't see any of this. He saw only a woman who had arrived late to his class. "Since Petty Officer Reynolds thinks her time is special, perhaps she'd like to help demonstrate today's techniques," Barrett said with a thin smile. The class parted as Reynolds moved to the front. She stood before Barrett, waiting for instructions. "I had a bad feeling right then," Daniels admitted to the recruits. "I knew Reynolds' background. Barrett didn't, and that made for a dangerous situation." What Daniels knew, what almost no one in that room knew, was that Alexandra Reynolds wasn't just another sailor. She was part of a classified program that had begun under President Reagan during the final years of the Cold War. The Artemis program, named after the Greek goddess of the hunt, had been a highly compartmentalized initiative to train female operatives for missions where men would be at a disadvantage. "During the Cold War, we needed assets who could move in certain environments without raising suspicion," Daniels explained. "Female operatives who could blend in, who could access places male operators couldn't. but they needed to be just as lethal, just as effective in combat situations. The program was small, never more than 20 active operatives at its peak. The training was identical to that received by male special operators with no concessions or adjusted standards. Many washout out. A few excelled. Alexandra Reynolds had been the program's star pupil. She had completed Bud's training alongside male candidates anonymized in the records as Candidate X. She had mastered advanced weapon systems, infiltration techniques, and hand-to-hand combat methodologies from around the world. She spoke 4 languages fluently. She could assemble and disassemble any NATO weapon blindfolded, and she had deployed, repeatedly. Her first mission had been to East Berlin in 1989, just months before the fall of the wall. Disguised as a Canadian graduate student, she had infiltrated a KGB facility and extracted critical intelligence about Soviet nuclear capabilities. The Soviets had sent 3 male operatives to the same facility, Daniel said. All were captured. 2 were executed. 1 spent 6 years in a prison before being exchanged. Reynolds got in and out in 48 hours with the complete targeting package. No one ever knew she was there. Over the next 15 years, she had participated in operations across Eastern Europe and the Middle East. Always covert, always deniable. Her official record showed routine deployments on support vessels. Her real achievements were documented only in classified files with code names like Marathon and Longbow. 7 combat deployments, Daniels told the recruits, 31 confirmed enemy combatants neutralized, 4 high-value targets captured, 2 rescued hostages, all while officially working as a logistics specialist. None of this was known to Barrett as he faced Reynolds on the mat. He saw only a female petty officer who he believed had no business in combat roles. The larger opponent will attempt to use superior strength and weight, Barrett explained to the class. They'll try to pin you to limit your mobility. Once that happens, your options become severely limited. He demonstrated a standard hold gripping Reynolds' arm firmly. His grip was unnecessarily tight, a small dominance display that didn't go unnoticed by Daniels or Reynolds. Most female combatants will be at a significant disadvantage in upper body strength, Barrett continued. This isn't opinion, it's biological reality. The average male has approximately 40% more upper body strength than the average female of similar fitness levels. In a combat situation, that differential can be lethal. Reynolds' expression remained neutral as Barrett used her to demonstrate various holds and control positions. She complied with his instructions, playing the role of the subdued opponent, offering no resistance. Now the manual teaches a standard escape technique, Barrett said, maintaining his grip on Reynolds' wrist. A quick pivot followed by a strike to vulnerable areas like the throat or groin. The problem is against a significantly stronger opponent, the initial break from the hold may be impossible to execute. He increased the pressure on Reynolds' wrist, causing several students to wince visibly. This is the reality you need to understand, he said, his voice harder now. In actual combat against an actual enemy who wants to actually kill you, technique will only get you so far. At some point, it comes down to strength, endurance, and the willingness to do whatever it takes to survive. Barrett was no longer simply teaching. He was making a point, using Reynolds as a prop in his personal crusade. His grip on her wrist had tightened to the point where his knuckles were white. The class had grown uncomfortably quiet. Daniels watched Reynolds carefully. Her breathing remained steady. Her gaze was focused not on Barrett's face but on the details of his posture, balance, and grip. She was making calculations, running scenarios. Daniels recognized the look. It was the same expression he'd seen on the faces of operators before they initiated a breach or an ambush. Barrett was so focused on proving his point that he missed all the warning signs, Daniels told the recruits. He didn't see what I saw. He didn't recognize the predator standing right in front of him. Barrett continued his demonstration, becoming more animated as he warmed to his subject. He was no longer simply instructing. He was performing, playing to his audience, seeking validation for his worldview. The modern battlefield has no place for hesitation or half measures, he declared. When you're fighting for your life, you can't afford to be nice. You can't afford to hold back. The enemy certainly won't. He directed Reynolds to attempt an escape from his hold, predicting her failure before she even moved. Go ahead, petty officer, he said. Show us the textbook response. Reynolds remained still, her eyes now fixed on Barrett's. I said demonstrate the escape technique, petty officer. Barrett repeated, his irritation growing. Sir, Reynolds said quietly, the technique you're demonstrating isn't in the current manual. The hold you're using leaves you vulnerable to a Type 3 counter. Barrett's face flushed. Are you instructing me now, Petty Officer? Please enlighten the class about these vulnerabilities. Daniel saw Reynolds make a decision. It happened in an instant, a barely perceptible shift in her posture. Her weight dropped slightly lower, her breathing slowed even further, and her focus narrowed. Sir, I recommend you release the hold, she said, her voice calm and professional. Barrett laughed, a short, dismissive sound. This is exactly what I'm talking about, people. Theory versus reality. Petty Officer Reynolds has read the manual, but she's about to learn that in the real world against a stronger opponent. Reynolds moved. It wasn't fast, not in the way most people understand speed. It was efficient. No wasted motion, no telegraphing, no hesitation. One moment she was standing still, apparently under Barrett's control. The next she had executed a precise shift of weight and leverage that broke his grip and placed him slightly off balance. Barrett, to his credit, reacted quickly. He attempted to re-establish control, moving to secure a more dominant position. In doing so, he made the fatal error of escalating the encounter. What had been a demonstration became a contest. His competitive instincts, honed through years of combat sports and actual combat, took over. He struck her. Not a demonstration, not a teaching moment, but an actual blow to her jaw. The sound of it cracked through the quiet gym like a gunshot. Time seemed to stop. The class froze in collective shock. Barrett himself appeared surprised by what he had done, his eyes widening slightly as he realized he had crossed a line. Reynolds didn't flinch. She didn't stagger. She absorbed the impact as if it were nothing more than a gentle tap. And that, Daniels told the hushed recruits, was when Alexandra Reynolds ceased being Petty Officer Reynolds and became Ghost, her call sign in the field. That was when Barrett sealed his fate. What happened next occurred so quickly that many of the witnesses would later disagree about the exact sequence of events. Reynolds executed what appeared to be a standard countermove, stepping inside Barrett's guard and disrupting his balance. But what should have been a simple reversal became something else entirely. She moved with the fluid precision of someone who had performed these exact movements thousands of times under the most extreme conditions imaginable. Each motion flowed into the next with mathematical perfection. There was no hesitation, no recalculation, no adjustment, just pure applied violence. Barrett, despite his size advantage and considerable skill, found himself utterly outmatched. He attempted to counter to regain the initiative, but each move he made was anticipated and neutralized before it could develop. It was like watching a chess master play against a novice, always 3 moves ahead, countering strategies before they fully formed. 7 seconds. That's how long it took from the moment Reynolds began her counterattack to the moment Barrett lay unconscious on the mat. 7 seconds, Daniels repeated. I counted. 7 seconds for one of our most decorated young officers to be completely neutralized by someone he had gravely underestimated. The class stood in stunned silence. Reynolds stood over Barrett, her breathing still calm, her posture relaxed. She looked up at Daniels, a silent question in her eyes. Daniels stepped forward. Class dismissed, he announced. Report to the secondary facility for continuation of training. Petty Officer Martinez escort Lieutenant Barrett to medical when he regains consciousness. Reynolds with me. As the sailors filed out, their whispered conversations already building the foundation of what would become a legend, Daniels approached Reynolds. That could have gone better, he said quietly. Reynolds' expression remained neutral. Yes, Master Chief, it could have. He struck you. He did. You could have killed him. Reynolds met his gaze steadily. Yes, I chose not to. Daniels nodded, acknowledging both the skill and the restraint. This is going to complicate things. I'm aware, Master Chief. Daniels sighed, already anticipating the administrative nightmare that was about to unfold. Report to Admiral Chandler's office at 1400. Say nothing to anyone about this incident. I'll handle the preliminary damage control. Reynolds nodded once sharply, then turned to leave. As she reached the door, Daniels called after her. Reynolds? She paused, looking back. Nice takedown. The ghost of a smile touched her lips, so brief it might have been imagined. Then she was gone, leaving Daniels alone with the unconscious Barrett and the small section of mat that would soon be marked with a star. The news spread through the base like wildfire. By mid-afternoon, the story had reached the highest levels of command, growing more elaborate with each retelling. In some versions, Barrett had been thrown across the room. In others, Reynolds had used some secret martial art known only to elite operatives. The truth, as usual, was both more simple and more complex. Admiral Thomas Chandler's office reflected the man himself, austere, organized, and intimidating. The admiral had served for 35 years, commanding everything from small patrol boats to carrier groups. Now approaching retirement, he oversaw several special programs, including Artemis. When Daniels arrived for the emergency meeting, the room was already crowded. Captain Richard Harris, the original architect of the Artemis program, sat opposite Chandler. At 70, Harris had officially retired a decade earlier, but remained as a civilian consultant, his expertise too valuable to lose completely. Two JAG officers were present, as well as a stone-faced representative from the Pentagon, whose name was conspicuously absent from the introductions. "Let me make sure I understand the situation correctly." Admiral Chandler began, his voice like gravel. "One of our most promising young officers physically assaulted a female petty officer during a training exercise." "That's accurate, sir," Daniels confirmed, and in response said petty officer who happens to be one of our most elite covert operatives incapacitated him in front of 30 witnesses. "Also accurate, sir." Jesus Christ. Chandler rubbed his temples. The political fallout from this is going to be a nightmare. We've got sexual harassment, assault, potential gender discrimination, and the exposure of a classified program all wrapped up in one tidy package. "If I may, Admiral," Harris interjected, "this could be an opportunity rather than just a problem." All eyes turned to the older man. "The Artemis program has been active for nearly 30 years, Harris continued. In that time, it has produced some of our most effective operators working missions that would have been impossible for traditional male assets. But it has remained hidden. Its success is unacknowledged. Its operators denied the recognition they deserve." He leaned forward, his eyes bright with conviction. "Perhaps it's time we brought it into the light, not as a scandal, but as a success story. The world is changing. The battlefield is changing. Our enemies don't care about gender when they're trying to kill Americans. Why should we limit our effectiveness based on outdated notions?" The Pentagon representative frowned. "The program remains classified for good reason. Exposure risks operational security and could endanger active operatives." "No one is suggesting we compromise current operations," Harris countered, "but the existence of the program itself, the fact that we have female operators who meet or exceed all standards, that information could change perceptions, improve recruitment, and ultimately enhance our fighting capability." The debate continued for over an hour, weighing options, considering consequences, and searching for a path forward that would minimize damage while maximizing potential benefits. Finally, a decision was reached. There would be no disciplinary action against either Barrett or Reynolds. The incident would be officially recorded as a training accident. Unofficially, steps would be taken to gradually bring aspects of the Artemis program into the light, starting with a specialized training unit that would incorporate both male and female operators. "And who will lead this unit?" Chandler asked. Harris smiled. "I think the answer is obvious. Petty Officer Reynolds has demonstrated both exceptional skill and remarkable restraint. Lieutenant Barrett, once he recovers, will serve as tactical advisor. Together, they represent both the traditional and the future of our special operations capability." Daniels raised an eyebrow. "You want to pair them up after what just happened?" "Precisely because of what just happened," Harris replied. "Barrett needs to learn that his preconceptions are dangerous. Reynolds needs to step out of the shadows and learn to lead openly. Both need to recognize that true strength comes in many forms, and the most effective teams leverage diverse capabilities." Chandler considered this, then nodded slowly. "It's unorthodox, but so is the situation. Make it happen, Daniels, but keep it contained. The last thing we need is for this to blow up in the press before we're ready." As the meeting dispersed, Harris pulled Daniels aside. "There's something else Barrett needs to know," he said quietly. "Something that might help him adjust his perspective." "What's that?" Harris's expression was grave. 3 years ago, Barrett led a squad in Somalia pursuing a high-value target. They were nearly ambushed by local militia. The only reason they survived was because an unidentified sniper eliminated the threat from over a mile away. Daniels felt a chill of realization. "Reynolds," Harris nodded. She was operating in the region tracking a separate target, spotted the ambush being set up, and intervened. Barrett never knew who saved his team that day. He filed it as unknown friendly fire support in his report. He doesn't know she saved his life. No, and I think it's time he did. As the recruits absorbed the story, Daniel stood once more over the small star embedded in the blue mat. So that's how it began, he told them. Right here. One moment of prejudice, one demonstration of skill, and the start of a change that would ultimately transform our entire approach to special operations. He looked at each of them and turned his gaze penetrating. The lesson isn't just about respecting female operators, though that's part of it. The real lesson is about assumptions, about judging capability based on appearance, about recognizing that the most dangerous person in the room rarely looks the part. One of the recruits raised his hand. Master Chief, what happened to Lieutenant Barrett? After he woke up, I mean. Daniel smiled slightly. That's the next part of the story. And in many ways, it's the most important one. Because what makes a true operator isn't never making mistakes, it's how you respond when you do. He gestured for them to follow him out of the gymnasium. Barrett woke up in the medical bay with a concussion, a dislocated shoulder, and a severely bruised ego. He was angry, embarrassed, and convinced that what had happened was some kind of fluke. But he was about to learn something that would change his perspective forever. The recruits followed, eagerly hungry for the next chapter in the story of the star on the blue mat. Barrett woke to the antiseptic smell of the medical bay and the dull throb of pain radiating from his shoulder. His memory returned in fragments. The training session, Reynolds, the demonstration that had spiraled out of control, his fist connecting with her jaw. And then, nothing. He attempted to sit up, wincing as his dislocated shoulder protested the movement. A corpsman noticed and approached his bed. Easy, sir. Doctor wants you to stay still until he's had a chance to examine you. Barrett ignored the advice, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. How long was I out? About 40 minutes, sir. You took quite a hit. Barrett's jaw tightened. The humiliation was worse than the pain. He, a decorated combat veteran and hand-to-hand instructor, had been taken down by a female petty officer in front of an entire class. The story would be all over the base by now. His authority, his reputation, possibly his career, all in jeopardy because of one momentary loss of control. Where is she? He demanded. Reynolds. The corpsman hesitated. I believe she's in with Admiral Chandler and Master Chief Daniels, sir. Of course she was. They were probably discussing his court-martial right now. He had struck a subordinate, a female subordinate, during a training exercise. The regulations on that were clear. He could kiss his career goodbye. The doctor arrived, a gray-haired commander with tired eyes and efficient movements. He examined Barrett's shoulder, confirming what Barrett already knew. A standard anterior dislocation already reduced by the medical team while he was unconscious. You'll need to wear a sling for at least 2 weeks, the doctor said, writing notes in Barrett's chart. No physical training, no lifting, definitely no hand-to-hand combat. I'm prescribing pain management and recommending light duty. Barrett nodded mechanically, his mind elsewhere. The doctor seemed to sense his distraction. Lieutenant, for what it's worth, I've seen the results of what Petty Officer Reynolds could have done. She showed remarkable restraint. Barrett's eyes snapped up to meet the doctor's. What do you mean? The doctor's expression was unreadable. Let's just say this isn't the first time I've treated injuries resulting from her skill set. Usually the other party isn't so lucky. Before Barrett could question him further, the medical bay doors swung open. Master Chief Daniels entered, his weathered face as expressionless as ever. Doctor, I need a moment with the lieutenant. The doctor nodded and withdrew, leaving Barrett alone with Daniels. How's the shoulder? Daniels asked, pulling up a chair. It's fine, Barrett replied curtly. Is this where you tell me to turn in my credentials? Daniels studied him silently for a moment. You struck a subordinate. I know, a female subordinate. I know that too, in front of 30 witnesses. Barrett's frustration boiled over. Yes, Master Chief, I am well aware of what I did. I lost control, I violated regulations, and I'm prepared to face the consequences. So if you're here to collect my insignia, let's just get it over with. Daniels remained calm in the face of Barrett's outburst. I'm not here to end your career, Lieutenant. I'm here to give you a choice about how it continues. Barrett blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. What? Daniels leaned forward. What happened today was unacceptable, but it's also an opportunity. An opportunity for you, for Reynolds, and for the entire special warfare community to move forward in a way that makes us all more effective. Barrett's eyes narrowed with suspicion. What are you talking about? I'm talking about Project Integration, a new training initiative focusing on combining the unique capabilities of all operators regardless of gender to create more adaptable and lethal teams. Barrett couldn't suppress a derisive snort. And let me guess, Reynolds will be the poster child. No, Daniels replied evenly. You both will. The confusion must have shown on Barrett's face because Daniels continued without waiting for a response. You and Reynolds will co-develop and lead the training program together. You'll draw on your respective strengths and experiences to create something neither of you could build alone. Barrett stared at Daniels in disbelief. You want me to work with the woman who just put me in the hospital? I want you to work with one of the most highly trained operators in the United States military, Daniels corrected. Someone who has completed missions you don't have the clearance to know about in places you can't even imagine. The way Daniels emphasized those words made Barrett pause. There was something here, something beyond a simple training accident in its aftermath. Who is she really? Barrett asked quietly. Daniels glanced toward the door, ensuring they were still alone. Lieutenant, what I'm about to tell you is classified. Disclosure to unauthorized personnel will result in charges of treason. Do you understand? Barrett nodded slowly. Petty Officer Alexandra Reynolds is a graduate of the Artemis program, a covert initiative that began in the final years of the Cold War. The program identified and trained female operators to the exact same standards as male special warfare personnel, then deployed them on missions where their gender gave them tactical advantages. Barrett listened with growing astonishment as Daniels outlined Reynolds' training and operational history. BUDS completion, advanced weapons and tactics, multiple combat deployments, confirmed kills, high-value target acquisitions. It seemed impossible, yet Daniels spoke with the quiet certainty of someone relating facts, not spinning tales. I don't understand, Barrett said finally. If she's so valuable, why is she here teaching basic hand-to-hand to regular sailors? Why isn't she in the field? Operational security, Daniels replied. After her last mission, intelligence indicated her cover might have been compromised. She's cooling her heels, maintaining her skills, and waiting for reassignment. Barrett shook his head, still struggling to reconcile the unassuming woman he had faced in the gym with the elite operator Daniels described. There's something else you should know, Daniels continued, his voice dropping even lower. Something Captain Harris thought might help you understand the situation better. Barrett waited, sensing the shift in Daniels' demeanor. 3 years ago, you led a squad in Somalia pursuing a high-value target named Farhan Ahmed. You were closing in when local militia set up an ambush. 3 snipers positioned on the ridgeline above your approach route. They had you dead to rights. Barrett stiffened. That operation had been classified. The ambush had nearly cost him and his entire team their lives. They'd only survived because unknown friendly fire support, Barrett whispered, recalling the phrase from his after-action report. 3 enemy snipers neutralized by long-range fire. We never identified the shooter. It was Reynolds, Daniels confirmed. She was in country on a separate operation, spotted the ambush being prepared and intervened. 3 shots, 3 kills. Sound familiar? Barrett felt the room tilt slightly. The woman he'd dismissed as a liability, the woman he'd struck in anger, had saved his life years earlier without him ever knowing. Why didn't anyone tell me? He asked, his voice hoarse. Compartmentalization. The Artemis program remains strictly need to know. Your team was extracted safely, mission accomplished. The details weren't relevant to your operational requirements. Barrett sat in stunned silence, processing the revelation. Every assumption he'd made about Reynolds had been wrong. Not just wrong, but dangerously, arrogantly wrong. So what happens now? He asked finally. Now you make a choice, Daniels replied. Option 1, administrative discharge. You struck a subordinate. No matter the circumstances, that's grounds for separation. Barrett nodded grimly. It was what he'd expected. Option 2, Daniels continued. You work with Reynolds. You learn from her. You help us bridge the gap between traditional special operations and what comes next. You help build something important. And if I say no, then we lose a good officer with valuable experience, Daniels said simply, and you lose the chance to be part of something that will save American lives and make our forces more effective. Barrett looked down at his injured shoulder, then back at Daniels. Does Reynolds know about this arrangement? She does, and she agreed to work with me after what happened. Daniels' mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. Reynolds is a professional lieutenant. She doesn't let personal feelings interfere with the mission. The question is, can you do the same? Barrett took a deep breath, weighing his options. Pride demanded he refuse that he take his discharge with what dignity remained. But duty, the deeper sense of obligation that had driven him since childhood, whispered something else. If Reynolds truly was what Daniels claimed, then working with her wasn't just a chance at redemption. It was an opportunity to become better at what mattered most, protecting his country and the men and women who served alongside him. "I'm in," he said finally. "When do we start?" Daniels stood. "As soon as medical clears you. In the meantime, there's someone who wants to speak with you." The door opened again and Captain Richard Harris entered. Though in his 70s, the captain moved with the deliberate precision of a much younger man. His eyes, clear and assessing, took in Barrett's condition with a single glance. "Lieutenant Barrett," Harris said, extending his hand, "I've been looking forward to meeting you." Barrett awkwardly shook hands with his good arm. "Captain." Harris pulled up a chair next to the bed. "Master Chief Daniels has briefed you on our proposal." "Yes, sir." "And you've agreed to participate." "I have." Harris nodded approvingly. "Good. You should know that I've been following your career for some time. Your actions in Afghanistan, particularly during the Kandahar incident, caught my attention. Not many officers would have risked their lives the way you did to save your men." Barrett shifted uncomfortably under the praise. "I did what anyone would have done, sir." "No, Lieutenant, you did what a leader does. You put the mission and your men before yourself." Harris leaned back in his chair. "That's why, despite today's incident, I believe you're the right person for this project." Barrett frowned. "With respect, sir, I'm not sure I understand why. I just demonstrated exactly the kind of bias the program is presumably trying to overcome." Harris smiled slightly. "Precisely. Who better to help change minds than someone whose mind has been changed? Your perspective both before and after will be invaluable." Before Barrett could respond, the medical bay door opened once more. Reynolds stood in the entrance, her posture perfect, her expression unreadable. The bruise on her jaw where Barrett had struck her was already darkening against her skin. Barrett tensed involuntarily. Even knowing what he now knew, it was difficult to reconcile this unremarkable-looking woman with the elite operator Daniels had described. Harris gestured for Reynolds to join them. She approached, acknowledging both superior officers with a nod before turning her attention to Barrett. "Lieutenant," she said, her voice neutral. "How's the shoulder?" Barrett met her gaze, searching for anger or resentment and finding none. "It's been better. Your handiwork, I presume." A flicker of something amusement perhaps crossed her face. "Standard joint manipulation. You left me little choice." "So I'm learning," Barrett replied. He hesitated, then added, "I owe you an apology, petty officer, for what happened in the gym. It was unprofessional and unacceptable." Reynolds regarded him steadily. "Yes, it was. No excuse offered, no absolution granted, just acknowledgement of the truth." Barrett found himself respecting her directness. "I also understand I owe you a debt from Somalia," he continued. "Though it seems thank you is inadequate for saving the lives of my entire team." "You don't owe me anything, Lieutenant," Reynolds replied. "I was doing my job, same as you were doing yours. Enemy snipers presented a threat. I neutralized it." Harris observed their exchange with evident satisfaction. "Well, now that we've established mutual respect, perhaps we should discuss how this partnership will work going forward." Over the next hour, Harris outlined his vision for project integration. The initial phase would involve Barrett and Reynolds developing a comprehensive training program that combined traditional special operations tactics with the more adaptive asymmetrical approaches employed by Artemis operators. Once established, they would jointly instruct selected personnel drawn from various special warfare communities. The goal, Harris explained, is not simply to integrate female operators into existing frameworks, but to evolve those frameworks to incorporate the full spectrum of capabilities that diverse teams can bring to bear. Barrett listened attentively, asking questions about logistics, personnel selection, and evaluation metrics. Despite his lingering discomfort, he found himself genuinely engaged with the concept. If Reynolds and others like her were truly as effective as claimed, then failing to utilize their capabilities wasn't just socially regressive, it was tactically unsound. Reynolds contributed sparingly to the discussion, offering technical clarifications, but otherwise allowing Harris to lead. Barrett noted that her reticence didn't seem to stem from deference or timidity, but rather from a habit of economy. She spoke only when necessary, and when she did, her input was precise and valuable. As the meeting concluded, Harris stood. "I'll leave you two to get acquainted properly. The project officially begins once medical clears Lieutenant Barrett, but I suggest you use the interim to establish your working parameters." After Harris departed, an awkward silence fell between Barrett and Reynolds. Despite everything he'd learned, Barrett still found it difficult to know how to relate to her. Was she a subordinate, a superior operator with a lower rank, a colleague? The ambiguity was uncomfortable. Reynolds seemed to sense his uncertainty. Permission to speak freely, Lieutenant. Granted, this will only work if we establish some ground rules, she said. First, what happened in the gym stays in the gym. I won't mention it if you don't. Barrett nodded. Agreed. Second, I respect your experience and your combat record. You've led men in the field and brought them home alive. That matters. But you need to respect my experience too, even if most of it is redacted from any file you'll ever see. That's fair, Barrett conceded. Third, we check our egos at the door. This isn't about you or me. It's about creating something that will save lives and make our operators more effective. That's the only metric that matters. Barrett studied her for a moment, seeing her in a new light. Despite her unimposing appearance, there was an undeniable intensity to her, a focused purpose that commanded respect. I can work with those terms, he said finally, and I'd like to add one of my own. Reynolds raised an eyebrow, waiting. Complete honesty, Barrett said. Even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's uncomfortable. If this is going to work, we need to be able to speak our minds without worrying about rank or politics. Reynolds considered this, then nodded. Agreed, honesty it is. She extended her hand and Barrett took it, sealing their agreement with a firm handshake. As their hands clasped, Barrett was struck by the calluses he felt on her palm, not the generalized toughness of someone who worked out regularly, but the specific pattern of someone intimately familiar with weapons and tools of war. In that moment, something shifted in Barrett's perception. The abstract concept of a female operator became concrete, embodied in the woman before him. Not as an exception or an anomaly, but simply as a soldier who had walked the same hard paths he had, who had faced the same enemies and made the same hard choices. I think this might actually work, he said, surprising himself with his sincerity. We'll see, Reynolds replied, neither optimistic nor pessimistic, just pragmatic. As she turned to leave, Barrett called after her. Reynolds. She paused at the door, looking back. Somalia, 3 shots at over a mile in desert conditions. That's impressive shooting. A small smile touched the corner of her mouth. I've made longer shots, Lieutenant. Then she was gone, leaving Barrett to contemplate the implications of her parting words. 3 weeks later, Barrett stood at the edge of the training yard watching Reynolds put a group of sailors through a modified close-quarters combat exercise. His shoulder had healed enough to remove the sling, though it still ached in damp weather. In that time, he and Reynolds had been working intensively on the framework for project integration, spending long hours debating approaches, methodologies, and priorities. The process had been eye-opening. Reynolds brought perspectives and insights Barrett had never considered. Her approach to combat was fundamentally different from the doctrine he'd been taught, not because she was a woman, but because her operational requirements had been different. While Barrett had been trained for direct action, Reynolds had specialized in covert infiltration, intelligence gathering, and precision elimination of high-value targets. She fought not to dominate enemies through superior force, but to neutralize them with minimal visibility and maximum deniability. The objective isn't to win the fight, she had explained during one of their planning sessions. It's to complete the mission. Sometimes that means avoiding the fight altogether. Today's exercise demonstrated that philosophy in action. The sailors working in pairs were tasked with navigating a complex urban environment to reach an extraction point. The twist was that one partner was blindfolded, forcing the other to guide them, using only verbal commands and physical contact. In real combat situations, you may be operating with limited visibility communications blackouts or injured teammates, Reynolds explained to the group. Your ability to adapt to work around these limitations, rather than being paralyzed by them, can mean the difference between mission success and failure. Barrett watched as the pair struggled through the course. Some adapted quickly, developing efficient communication systems that allowed them to move with surprising speed and confidence. Others floundered, their frustration mounting as they repeatedly hit obstacles or lost their bearings. What do you see? Reynolds asked quietly, appearing at his side. Barrett considered the question seriously. 3 weeks ago, he might have offered a glib answer about the importance of physical strength or standard operating procedures. Now he looked deeper. Different problem-solving approaches, he said finally. The successful teams aren't necessarily the strongest or fastest individually. They're the ones who recognize their limitations and develop systems to compensate. Reynolds nodded approvingly. Exactly. And notice something else. In the most effective pairs, the guide isn't always the higher-ranked individual. Leadership shifts based on who has the critical information or capability in that moment. Barrett saw it now. A petty officer deferring to a seaman's guidance. A burly male sailor following the precise directions of a smaller female partner. Authority flowing naturally to whoever could best achieve the immediate objective, regardless of conventional hierarchies. Adaptive leadership, Barrett murmured, fluid and responsive to changing conditions. It's how Artemis teams operated, Reynolds confirmed. When your entire mission depends on moving undetected through hostile territory, traditional command structures can become liabilities. Everyone needs to be capable of leading when circumstances demand it. Barrett nodded thoughtfully. We should incorporate this into the core curriculum, not just as a tactical exercise, but as a foundational philosophy. As they continued to observe the exercise, Barrett became aware of a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The sailors who had initially viewed Reynolds with curiosity or skepticism now watched her with growing respect. Her competence, demonstrated daily without fanfare or self-promotion, had earned their attention in a way no amount of rank or authority could have commanded. But it was more than that. Over the past weeks, a small group of female sailors had begun to gravitate toward Reynolds during off hours. They sought her out for additional training, for advice, for mentorship. Reynolds never advertised these sessions, but she never turned anyone away either. Barrett had stumbled across one such gathering in the auxiliary gym late one evening. Reynolds was working with 3 young women on advanced disarming techniques. What struck him wasn't just the technical instruction, but the quiet confidence Reynolds was instilling in her students. She wasn't teaching them to fight like men. She was teaching them to fight effectively, using their own bodies and capabilities to maximum advantage. He had withdrawn without interrupting, but the scene had stayed with him. For the first time, he recognized that his previous attitude hadn't just been unfair to women like Reynolds. It had potentially deprived his country of valuable assets and capabilities in the field. The exercise concluded, and Reynolds dismissed the sailors with specific feedback on their performance. As they dispersed, Barrett approached her. "I've been thinking about the night infiltration component," he said without preamble. "Your approach makes sense theoretically, but I'm concerned about the practical application with mixed teams." Reynolds raised an eyebrow. "Specific concerns." "Equipment standardization," Barrett replied. "The gear is designed around male body types. That creates potential failure points in high-stress situations." Reynolds nodded. "I've had the same thought. We'll need to incorporate equipment modification protocols, allow operators to adapt standard issue to their individual requirements. Won't that create logistical complications?" Some, Reynolds acknowledged, but less than having operators whose gear fails at critical moments. Barrett considered this, then nodded. "Fair point. We should document successful modifications, create a database of tested adaptations." "Already started," Reynolds said. "I've been collecting data from Artemis operators for years. Most of us learned the hard way which modifications were necessary." Barrett wasn't surprised. In their weeks working together, he'd come to appreciate Reynolds' thoroughness and foresight. She anticipated problems before they arose and developed solutions based on practical experience rather than theoretical models. "We should present the initial curriculum to Captain Harris by the end of the week," Barrett said. "Are you available to finalize the proposal tomorrow evening?" Reynolds checked her watch. "Can't. I'm running a specialized training session for some of the women who've expressed interest in advanced qualifications." Barrett hesitated, then asked, "Mind if I observe?" Reynolds studied him for a moment as if assessing his motives. "Why? Because I need to understand all aspects of what we're building," Barrett replied honestly. "And because I suspect you're doing something important that should be incorporated into the official program." Reynolds seemed satisfied with his answer. 1900 hours. Auxiliary Gym C. Don't interrupt, just observe. Barrett arrived at the specified time to find the auxiliary gym transformed. Training mats covered the floor, and various pieces of equipment, ropes, weights, obstacles, had been arranged to create a complex course. 8 women were present, ranging in rank from seaman to lieutenant, junior grade. All were in standard PT gear, all looked intensely focused. Reynolds stood at the center of the group, her posture relaxed but authoritative. "Tonight we're focusing on asymmetrical response to multiple attackers," she was saying. "When you're outweighed and outnumbered, direct confrontation is usually the wrong approach. You need to control the engagement, dictate the terms, and neutralize threats in a specific sequence." Barrett found a spot along the wall where he could observe without being intrusive. What unfolded over the next 2 hours was one of the most impressive training sessions he had ever witnessed. Reynolds wasn't simply teaching techniques, she was imparting a comprehensive combat philosophy tailored specifically to operators who would typically be at a size and strength disadvantage against their opponents. The women moved through scenarios of escalating complexity, learning to use leverage momentum and precision rather than brute force. They practiced identifying and exploiting vulnerabilities, creating distance when necessary, and closing decisively when advantageous. They learned to use their environment to improvise weapons to create and exploit chaos in ways that negated their opponent's physical advantages. Most importantly, they gained confidence. Not the false confidence of someone who has never faced real danger, but the earned confidence of individuals who understand both their capabilities and their limitations. As the session concluded, the women gathered around Reynolds for a final debrief. Barrett couldn't hear what was said, but he could see the impact in their expressions. They walked taller as they left, carrying themselves with a new awareness of their own potential. Reynolds approached him after they had gone. "Your thoughts, Lieutenant?" Barrett considered his answer carefully. "I think you're building something invaluable here, something that should be formalized and expanded." Reynolds tilted her head slightly, meaning, these women, they're learning more than techniques. They're developing a mindset and approach to combat that plays to their strengths rather than emphasizing their limitations. Barrett paused, then added, "It's exactly what project integration should be about." Reynolds studied him for a long moment. "You've changed your perspective." It wasn't a question, but Barrett answered anyway. "Yes, I was wrong before. Not just about you, but about the entire concept of women in combat roles. I was blinded by tradition and preconception, and it made me less effective as an officer and as a fighter." Reynolds nodded, accepting his admission without comment. Then she said, "There's a demonstration for the brass next week. Admiral Chandler, Captain Harris, and representatives from SOCOM will be observing our progress." Barrett understood the implicit question. "Are we ready to show them what we've been developing?" "Almost," Reynolds replied. "But there's one component we haven't fully addressed yet, which is joint operations," she said simply. "You and I have been working in parallel, but we haven't actually demonstrated the integration we're advocating." Barrett recognized the truth in her statement. They had collaborated on the curriculum, shared ideas and methodologies, but they hadn't physically trained together since the incident that had started everything. "What do you suggest?" he asked. Reynolds gestured to the training area. "We have 6 days before the demonstration. I think it's time you and I showed each other exactly what we're capable of." Barrett felt a surge of both apprehension and anticipation. "You want us to spar?" "I want us to learn from each other," Reynolds corrected. "No ego, no rank, just two operators exchanging knowledge and skills." Barrett considered the proposal. His shoulder was mostly healed, though not at full strength. More significantly, the prospect of facing Reynolds again, knowing what he now knew about her capabilities, was intimidating. But it was also necessary if they were truly committed to what they were building. "All right," he said finally. "When do we start?" "Tomorrow, 0500, Reynolds replied. And Barrett, "Yes." A small, challenging smile touched her lips. "Bring your A game." The next morning, as dawn broke over Coronado, two figures circled each other on the training mats of the deserted auxiliary gym. Barrett and Reynolds moved with the focused intensity of predators, each studying the other's movements, searching for patterns, weaknesses, openings. What began as tentative exchanges gradually evolved into a complex dialogue of action and reaction, technique and counter technique. Barrett brought power experience in conventional combat training. Reynolds contributed speed, precision, and unconventional approaches. Neither dominated, neither submitted. Instead, they pushed each other to greater heights of performance, each adaptation met with a corresponding counter-adaptation. It wasn't a contest. It was collaboration expressed through physical movement, ideas communicated through action rather than words. And in that exchange, something new began to emerge, a synthesis that transcended their individual approaches. By the time they finally paused, both breathing hard, sweat soaking their PT gear, the sun had fully risen. They had been training for over 2 hours, though it had seemed like minutes. That, Barrett said between breaths, was educational. Reynolds nodded, a rare smile breaking through her professional facade. Yes, it was. As they gathered their gear, Barrett found himself looking forward to the next session with unexpected eagerness. For the first time since the incident that had brought them together, he felt genuine optimism about what they were creating. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked. Reynolds nodded. "Tomorrow we add weapons." Barrett raised an eyebrow. "Blunted training knives." The look Reynolds gave him was both amused and slightly predatory. "Let's start there and see where it leads." As they left the gym walking together into the brightening day, Barrett realized that Captain Harris had been right. This unexpected partnership, born from confrontation and misunderstanding, was evolving into something valuable. Not just for them, not just for the women who sought Reynolds' guidance, but potentially for the entire special operations community. The star on the blue mat, marking the spot where Barrett had learned his most expensive lesson, was becoming the foundation for something much larger and more important. Something that might in time save lives and change the face of warfare itself. Reynolds, Barrett said as they reached the point where their paths would diverge. She paused, looking at him inquiringly. Thank you, he said simply, for Somalia, for this, for... He gestured vaguely, searching for the right words. For kicking your ass and opening your mind, Reynolds suggested, her expression deadpan. Barrett laughed, surprised by both her humor and its accuracy. Yes, for exactly that. Reynolds nodded once, accepting his gratitude without making a fuss. Then she turned and walked away, her movements as economical and purposeful as everything else about her. Barrett watched her go, reflecting on how completely his perspective had changed in just a few short weeks. He had entered this arrangement seeking only to salvage his career. Now he found himself genuinely committed to the vision they were building together. It wouldn't be easy. There would be resistance, skepticism, institutional inertia. But standing there in the early morning light, Barrett felt something he hadn't experienced since before the ambush in Kandahar, pure uncomplicated purpose. The demonstration was 6 days away. They would be ready, and after that the real work would begin. The day of the demonstration dawned clear and cool, a light breeze carrying the salt tang of the Pacific across the Coronado base. In the pre-dawn darkness, Barrett and Reynolds moved through their final preparatory session, refining the sequences they would showcase later that morning. After 6 days of intensive training together, they had developed a remarkable synchronicity. What had begun as a tentative exchange of techniques had evolved into something more profound, a genuine integration of their respective approaches to combat. Barrett had absorbed elements of Reynolds' precision and economy of movement. Reynolds had incorporated aspects of Barrett's power and direct engagement tactics. Together they had created something new, a hybrid methodology that played to the strengths of each operator while minimizing vulnerabilities. Command deck wants us in the briefing room at 0730, Barrett said as they concluded their session. Final coordination before the brass arrives. Reynolds nodded, toweling sweat from her face. How's the shoulder? Good enough, Barrett replied with a small smile. It was a private joke between them now. The shoulder that Reynolds had dislocated weeks ago had become a barometer of their progress together. Its gradual healing had paralleled the development of their professional relationship from antagonism to mutual respect. The women from my evening sessions want to know if they can observe today, Reynolds said, changing the subject. Barrett considered this. Not officially part of the program yet. I know, but they've been working hard. It would mean something to them. Barrett studied her for a moment. In the weeks they had worked together, he had come to recognize the subtle shifts in Reynolds' typically impassive expression. The slight tension around her eyes now indicated this request mattered to her. I'll clear it with Harris, he said finally. No promises, but I'll try. The ghost of a smile touched Reynolds' lips. Thanks. They parted to shower and change, each lost in their own thoughts about the day ahead. For Barrett, the demonstration represented more than just the unveiling of a new training program. It was the public acknowledgement of his transformation from a man who had dismissed female operators as liabilities to one who recognized their unique value to the mission. It was an admission that he had been wrong and a commitment to a new way forward. The briefing room was already crowded when Barrett arrived at 0725. Captain Harris stood at the head of the table, surrounded by junior officers organizing presentation materials. Master Chief Daniels sat in a corner, his weathered face giving nothing away as he observed the controlled chaos. Lieutenant, Harris greeted Barrett. Everything ready for the dog and pony show? Yes, sir, Barrett replied. Reynolds and I completed our final run through this morning. Harris nodded approvingly. Good. Admiral Chandler will be accompanied by Rear Admiral Peterson from Naval Special Warfare Command and representatives from SOCOM. They're interested in potentially implementing elements of the program across multiple special operations communities. Barrett raised an eyebrow, impressed. The presence of SOCOM representatives indicated that project integration had garnered attention at the highest levels of special operations leadership. What had begun as a response to an isolated incident was now being considered as a template for the entire community. Sir, Barrett said, Reynolds asked if the women from her evening training sessions could observe today. I told her I'd run it by you. Harris considered this. The unofficial group she's been mentoring. Yes, sir. 8 women, mostly junior enlisted, though there's a Lieutenant JG as well. They've been working with Reynolds on advanced combat techniques. Harris stroked his chin thoughtfully. Normally I'd say no to unauthorized personnel, but in this case, it might actually strengthen our presentation. Demonstrates the program has already generated organic interest and results. My thought exactly, sir. Have them report to Master Chief Daniels at the training facility at 0900. He'll handle the security clearances. Harris glanced at his watch. Speaking of which, our guest will be arriving in 30 minutes. Where's Reynolds? As if summoned by the question, Reynolds appeared in the doorway, crisp in her service uniform. Barrett noted the rows of ribbons on her chest, visual testimony to a career of service that most people would never fully understand. The Combat Action Ribbon, the Navy Commendation Medal with Combat Vive, and several others that spoke of deployments to hostile territories and actions under fire. Only a fraction of her actual accomplishments Barrett knew, but impressive nonetheless. Petty Officer Reynolds reporting as ordered, sir, she said, addressing Captain Harris. Right on time, Harris replied. We were just discussing the final arrangements. Reynolds glanced at Barrett, a silent question in her eyes. He gave a slight nod, confirming that her request had been approved. She acknowledged this with the barest inclination of her head, then turned her attention back to Harris as he outlined the schedule for the demonstration. The briefing was concise and professional. Harris had arranged for a select group of operators from various special warfare units to serve as the demonstration team. Barrett and Reynolds would lead them through a series of exercises showcasing the integrated approach they had developed over the past month. Following this, there would be a presentation of the full curriculum with emphasis on how it could be scaled and implemented across different commands. Questions, Harris asked as he concluded the briefing. Sir, Reynolds spoke up. Will we be discussing the Artemis program itself? Harris exchanged a glance with Daniels. To a limited extent, the Admiral is prepared to acknowledge its existence and general purpose, but operational details remain classified. Focus on the methodologies, not the specific missions or personnel. Reynolds nodded, satisfied. One more thing, Harris added, his voice taking on a more serious tone. This isn't just about showcasing a new training program. This is about changing a culture. The resistance will be real both in that room today and throughout the community if this moves forward. Be prepared for skepticism, for dismissal, even for outright hostility. Barrett met Reynolds' gaze across the room. They had discussed this reality extensively during their planning sessions. The special operations community, like any elite group, was resistant to change. Traditions and methodologies that had proven successful in the past were not easily abandoned. Add to that the deeply ingrained gender expectations that permeated military culture, and they were facing an uphill battle. We're ready, sir, Barrett said with quiet confidence. Harris studied them both, then nodded once sharply. I believe you are. Let's go make some history. The demonstration facility had been prepared with meticulous attention to detail. The main floor had been divided into stations, each designed to showcase different aspects of the integrated training approach. Urban combat scenarios, long-range interdiction, close quarters, battle, asymmetrical response tactics, equipment, modifications, and adaptive leadership exercises all had dedicated areas. As the official party entered, Barrett stood at attention alongside Reynolds. Admiral Chandler led the group, followed by Rear Admiral Peterson and 3 officers wearing the distinct insignia of the Special Operations Command. Behind them came a collection of senior officers from various naval warfare communities, their faces composed in expressions of professional interest tinged with skepticism. Barrett recognized the look. It was the same expression he himself would have worn just a month ago, confronted with the proposition that traditional special operations methodologies could be improved by incorporating approaches developed for and by female operators. The irony wasn't lost on him. Captain Harris stepped forward to greet the visitors and provide introductory remarks. Barrett used the moment to scan the periphery of the room. In a designated observation area, he spotted the 8 women from Reynolds' evening sessions. They stood together, their posture perfect, their attention absolute. Among them, he recognized the lieutenant junior grade Reynolds had mentioned, a slender woman with watchful eyes who seemed to be studying the senior officers with particular intensity. Admiral Chandler stepped to the center of the floor as Harris concluded his introduction. Gentlemen, he addressed the assembly then, with a nod toward Reynolds and the female observers. Ladies, We are here today to evaluate a new approach to special operations training and deployment. For decades, our community has operated under certain assumptions about optimal force composition and methodology. Today, those assumptions will be challenged. The Admiral's gaze swept the room, making eye contact with each senior officer in turn. I expect open minds and rigorous assessment. The only relevant metric is operational effectiveness. Personal biases and traditional thinking are to be set aside in favor of objective analysis of results. Is that clear? A chorus of "yes, sir" echoed through the space. Chandler nodded to Barrett and Reynolds. "Lieutenant Petty Officer, the floor is yours." Barrett stepped forward. "Thank you, Admiral. Over the past month, Petty Officer Reynolds and I have developed what we call the Integrated Combat Methodology. It combines traditional special operations approaches with techniques developed through the Artemis program." A murmur ran through the assembled officers at the mention of Artemis. As expected, few of them had been briefed on its existence prior to this meeting. "For those unfamiliar," Barrett continued, "the Artemis program was established in the final years of the Cold War to train female operators for missions where their gender provided tactical advantages. These operators received the same training as their male counterparts in BODS and other special warfare qualification courses with no adjusted standards or expectations." He gestured to Reynolds. "Petty Officer Reynolds is a graduate of the program with 7 combat deployments and an operational record that would impress anyone in this room if you had the clearance to hear it." The murmur grew slightly louder. Barrett could see the skepticism in some faces, the disbelief in others. He pressed on. "What we've learned through working together is that the approaches developed within the Artemis program have applications far beyond their original context. By integrating these methodologies with traditional special operations tactics, we can create more adaptable, more robust, effective operators regardless of gender." Reynolds stepped forward to join him. "We'll demonstrate this through a series of practical exercises followed by a detailed presentation of the curriculum we've developed." What followed was a precisely choreographed showcase of the techniques and approaches they had refined over the past month. The demonstration team, composed of both male and female operators, moved through scenarios of escalating complexity. In each case, they employed hybrid methodologies that drew from both traditional special operations tactics and the Artemis approach. In the urban combat scenario, they demonstrated how smaller operators could use environmental features and momentum to neutralize larger opponents. In the long-range interdiction station, they showcased adaptations to standard sniper protocols that improved accuracy and reduced detection probability. At each station, Barrett and Reynolds provided commentary explaining the underlying principles and their practical applications. Throughout the demonstration, Barrett noted the changing expressions on the faces of the observing officers. Initial skepticism gave way to professional curiosity, then to genuine interest as the effectiveness of the integrated approach became apparent. Not universal conversion, certainly, but enough to suggest that minds were opening to the possibilities. As they reached the final station focused on adaptive leadership, Reynolds took the lead. "Traditional command structures are based on rank and experience," she explained. "These remain important, but in certain operational contexts, they can become liabilities. The Artemis program developed an adaptive leadership model where authority shifts based on who possesses the critical skills or information for a specific phase of the mission." She directed the demonstration team through an exercise where leadership transitioned seamlessly between members based on changing circumstances. A communications specialist took command during an intelligence gathering phase, then yielded to a demolitions expert when an obstacle needed clearing, who in turn deferred to a medical officer when a team member was injured. "This approach requires ego subordination and mutual trust," Reynolds continued. "Every team member must be willing to lead when appropriate and follow when necessary. The result is greater operational flexibility and resilience in rapidly changing environments." As the demonstration concluded, Barrett stepped forward to deliver the final summary. "What we've shown today represents just a fraction of the full curriculum we've developed. The integrated combat methodology doesn't replace traditional special operations training. It enhances it by incorporating proven techniques from a program that has operated successfully in the shadows for decades." He paused, making eye contact with several of the more skeptical officers. "I understand the resistance some of you may feel. A month ago, I would have been the loudest voice opposing this approach. I believed that women had no place in combat operations, that their presence would endanger missions and get real operators killed." The room had gone completely silent. I was wrong, Barrett said simply. My perspective was based on assumption and bias, not on operational reality. Working with Petty Officer Reynolds and learning about the Artemis program has fundamentally changed my understanding of what makes an effective operator. It isn't size or gender. It's skill adaptability and the willingness to subordinate ego to mission. He gestured to the demonstration team. These operators, male and female, have spent just 3 weeks training under the integrated methodology. In that time, they've achieved performance improvements that would take months under traditional approaches. Imagine what could be accomplished if we implemented this system across the entire special operations community. Admiral Chandler stepped forward as Barrett concluded. Thank you, Lieutenant Petty Officer. Most illuminating. He turned to the assembled officers. Questions? A commander from Naval Special Warfare raised his hand. Sir, with respect, we're looking at a very small sample size here. How can we be certain these results would scale across larger units? Barrett deferred to Reynolds, who had anticipated this question. Commander, the methodology has been tested extensively, albeit secretly, through the Artemis program. Over 3 decades, we've deployed operators trained in these techniques to some of the most hostile environments imaginable. The success rate speaks for itself. Can you provide specific metrics? The commander pressed. Many remain classified, Reynolds acknowledged. But I can tell you that Artemis operators have maintained a mission success rate of 94% across all deployments. The comparable figure for traditional special operations teams during the same period is 87%. The commander looked surprised and thoughtful. Another officer spoke up. The physical reality is that women on average have less upper body strength than men. How do you account for this in operations requiring brute force? Barrett took this one. By ensuring that teams are composed to include complementary capabilities. Not every operator needs to excel at every task. The key is to build teams where collective capabilities cover all operational requirements. This isn't just about gender. It's about recognizing that different body types and attributes can be advantages in different contexts. The questions continued for nearly an hour, ranging from logistical concerns about equipment modifications to cultural issues around team cohesion. Barrett and Reynolds fielded each one with data-driven responses, showcasing the depth of thought they had put into every aspect of the program. As the session wound down, Admiral Chandler addressed the group once more. I want to thank Lieutenant Barrett and Petty Officer Reynolds for their work on this initiative. What we've seen today merits serious consideration. I'm directing a 6-month pilot program to further evaluate the integrated combat methodology across selected units. Rear Admiral Peterson will oversee implementation with Barrett and Reynolds serving as program directors. He turned to Barrett and Reynolds. Congratulations. You have earned the opportunity to prove your concept on a larger scale. The assembly began to disperse, officers gathering in small groups to discuss what they had witnessed. Barrett felt a surge of satisfaction. Not universal acceptance, not yet, but a foot in the door. A chance to demonstrate on a larger stage what he and Reynolds had come to believe, that integration wasn't just a social policy, but a tactical advantage. Captain Harris approached them, his expression pleased but contained. Well done, both of you. You made a compelling case. Thank you, sir, Barrett replied. 6 months isn't much time. It's enough, Harris assured him. If the results are as strong as I expect, we'll see this methodology adopted across special operations within 2 years. Reynolds, typically reserved, allowed herself a small smile. Sir, permission to speak with the women from my evening sessions. They've been waiting patiently. Harris nodded. Granted, I imagine they're quite proud of their mentor today. As Reynolds moved away to speak with her protégés, Barrett found himself approached by the SOCOM representatives. Impressive presentation, Lieutenant, said one, a colonel with the weathered look of someone who had spent decades in the field, particularly given your own journey on this issue. Thank you, sir, Barrett replied. It's been educational. The colonel studied him thoughtfully. You know, the hardest thing for men like us isn't learning new tactics or mastering new weapon systems. It's admitting we might have been wrong about something fundamental. That takes a different kind of courage. Barrett nodded, acknowledging the truth of the statement. We'll be watching the pilot program with great interest, the colonel continued. If it proves as effective as you suggest, it could change the face of special operations across all branches. After the colonel moved on, Barrett found himself alone for a moment, watching as Reynolds spoke with her group of female sailors. Their faces showed admiration and excitement, women who suddenly saw possibilities they hadn't dared imagine before. It struck Barrett that this, perhaps even more than the tactical advantages, was the true value of what they were building: a future where talent, and capability, not gender or tradition, determined who could serve in the most elite units. Master Chief Daniels appeared at his side, following Barrett's gaze to where Reynolds stood with her students. "You've come a long way from the officer who got his ass handed to him on that blue mat," Daniels observed dryly. Barrett laughed. "That I have, Master Chief. You know this isn't over," Daniels said, his tone turning serious. "The Admiral gave you 6 months, but there are plenty of old guard who'll fight this every step of the way. They'll look for any failure, any mistake, to prove the traditional way is still best." "I'm counting on it," Barrett replied with unexpected fervor. "The resistance will make us better, force us to refine the methodology, eliminate weaknesses. By the time we're done, the results will be undeniable." Daniels studied him with new respect. "You really believe in this now?" "I do." Barrett turned to face the older man directly. "A month ago, I was blinded by prejudice and tradition. I couldn't see past my own assumptions to recognize capabilities that didn't fit my preconceptions. How many others like Reynolds are out there, Master Chief? How much talent are we wasting because it doesn't come in the package we expect?" Daniels nodded slowly. "More than we can afford to lose." "Exactly. This isn't just about making our existing operators more effective. It's about expanding the pool of people who can become operators in the first place." Barrett gestured toward Reynolds and her group. "Look at them. A month ago, most of those women wouldn't have dreamed they could serve in special operations. Now they're starting to believe it's possible. That's a resource we can't afford to waste." The facility had nearly emptied when Reynolds finally approached Barrett. Her protégés had departed, but the energy of their enthusiasm seemed to linger around her. "Your fan club seems pleased," Barrett remarked. Reynolds allowed herself a small smile. "They're good sailors. With the right training, several of them could be exceptional operators." "Then we'll make sure they get that training," Barrett said firmly. "Once the pilot program proves successful, we'll need a pipeline for recruitment and qualification." "Already planning that far ahead." "Someone has to," Barrett replied with a shrug. 6 months will go by fast." They walked together toward the exit, both lost in thought about the challenges ahead. The demonstration had gone well better than either had dared hope, but they harbored no illusions about the difficulty of the task before them. Changing institutional culture was never easy, particularly in an organization as steeped in tradition as the military. As they reached the door, Reynolds paused. "Barrett." He stopped, turning to face her. "Yes. Thank you," she said simply, "for being willing to change your mind. Not everyone would have." Barrett shook his head. "I should be thanking you for showing me a better way forward, even after I gave you every reason to write me off as just another stubborn officer too set in his ways to learn anything new." "You proved me wrong about that," Reynolds admitted. "I expected compliance with the program, not genuine conversion to its principles." "The evidence was compelling," Barrett said with a small smile. "Hard to argue with results." They stepped outside into the bright California sunlight, blinking against the sudden glare. Across the bay, San Diego gleamed its skyline sharp against the clear blue sky. "So," Barrett said after a moment, "project director. That's quite a promotion from training instructor." Reynolds nodded. "For both of us." "Think you can stand working with me for another 6 months?" The ghost of a smile touched her lips. "I'll manage somehow." 10 years later, Master Chief William Daniels stood once more on the blue mat in the Coronado training facility. A fresh group of recruits gathered around him. The small black star, somewhat faded now, but still distinct against the dark blue, remained a focal point for his story. And that, he concluded, is how the integrated combat methodology began. Right here, with one officer's prejudice and one operator's skill, setting in motion changes that would transform the entire special operations community. The recruits, men and women in equal numbers, listened with rapt attention. For them, the events Daniels described were already passing into legend, part of the foundational mythology of their chosen profession. "Where are they now, Master Chief?" asked one young woman, her expression intent. "Lieutenant Barrett and Petty Officer Reynolds." "Commander Barrett," Daniels corrected with a small smile, "serves as the executive officer at the Naval Special Warfare Development Group. He oversees all integrated team training and deployment." And Reynolds pressed another recruit. "Captain Reynolds," Daniels said, his voice carrying a note of pride, "commands her own task force operating out of an undisclosed location. The details of her current mission remain classified, but I can tell you this: she leads one of the most effective special operations units in the United States military, with a team composition that would have been unimaginable a decade ago." He looked around at the young faces before him, seeing the eagerness, the determination, the hunger to prove themselves worthy of the legacy they sought to join. The lesson of this star, Daniels continued tapping the floor with his foot, isn't just about respecting female operators, though that's part of it. The real lesson is about assumptions, about challenging what we think we know, about recognizing that the most dangerous person in the room rarely looks the part. He straightened his aged frame, still carrying the dignity and authority earned through decades of service. Each of you came here with preconceptions about what makes an effective operator, about who belongs in this community and who doesn't. Check those assumptions at the door. They will only limit your growth and the growth of those around you. The recruits nodded, absorbing his words with the seriousness they deserved. Now, Daniel said, his tone lightening slightly, let me tell you what happened when Commander Barrett woke up in medical after his encounter with Captain Reynolds. That's when the real story began. Outside the training facility, the sun shone brightly on Coronado Naval Base. In offices and classrooms, on ranges, and in simulation rooms, men and women worked together, learning and teaching the integrated methodologies that had become standard throughout special operations. 2 years after the pilot program began, Reynolds and Barrett led their first joint mission in northern Syria. A high-value intelligence asset needed extraction from a region where traditional special operations teams had previously failed. The integrated team, composed of 6 operators, selected for complementary skills rather than conformity to a single standard, completed the mission with 0 casualties. The intel they recovered prevented 3 planned terrorist attacks on American soil, saving countless lives and validating the new approach beyond any remaining doubts. In a quiet corner of the base, a small plaque had been installed, visible only to those who knew to look for it. The inscription was simple: the most dangerous person in the room rarely looks the part. Captain A. Reynolds, USN. The star on the blue mat had become more than a location or a story. It had transformed into a philosophy that guided a new generation of operators. Across all branches of special operations teams now trained under the integrated combat methodology, their effectiveness measured not by adherence to tradition, but by mission success and lives saved. And somewhere in the shadows, continuing the quiet professional work of keeping their nation safe, Barrett and Reynolds carried forward the legacy they had created together, their unlikely partnership proving more valuable than either could have imagined on that fateful day when prejudice met skill on a blue mat in Coronado. Now, Daniel said to the recruits, his tone lightening slightly, let me tell you what happened when Commander Barrett woke up in medical after his encounter with Captain Reynolds. That's when the real story